Transferable skills. From Cackle Media, this is Transferable Skills. I'm Noah Mishkin, and today's guest is Becky Altman, who shares her career journey from clinical social work into becoming an executive and leadership coach. Hers is a true testament to the power of adaptability, the importance of building relationships, and leveraging transferable skills across varied professional landscapes. In this episode, we'll explore insights into how skills like empathy, communication, and resilience can propel personal and professional growth. Stick around.
I started my career 20 plus years ago as a clinical social worker, working with different groups across many different areas, foster care, healthcare, school systems, and then moved into the nonprofit management space where I ran an overnight summer camp for over a decade, and then decided it was time for another change and pivoted into corporate HR for a publicly traded company. Currently, I am on my own as an independent executive and leadership coach and consultant and workshop facilitator.
Tell me a little bit about how your social work experience, can you tell us a little bit about the type of work that you were doing?
I started my career in medical social work, working with families and children impacted by chronic illness. And then I moved into the foster care system. And truthfully, at the core of what I was doing was, like you said, in service of people and helping people navigate through really hard challenges. No. It's funny when I think about my journey, what I learned in my social work experience, really at the beginning of my career, was how to hone my communication skills, my listening skills, my inquiry skills in the service of helping people figure out solutions to their problems. In social work, what I loved about social work and still love about social work is this belief of self-determination and empowerment, that we all hold the answers to our own problems. Sometimes we just need someone to help us find them. And that has always been really the core of social work as a field. When I worked in the medical setting, in the school setting, and in the foster care system, people were faced with real challenges. And I worked a lot with underrepresented groups, really facing systemic inequities. And ultimately, my job was to really help them navigate through those hardships. And a firm believer of self-determination, that despite the challenges that the society was putting on them, they had strengths, they had skills, they had the ability to navigate, they just needed support. I found that work massively rewarding. And when I think about reflecting back now on like a 20 plus year career, I'm still doing that. That's still what drives me every morning, which is I'm in service of people and helping them navigate through hard challenges. What those challenges are have varied. Where those challenges exist has changed for me. But at the core of it, I still firmly believe we all have the answers inside us. We just sometimes get in our own way and we are tangled in a mess. And my job is to help people navigate and get untangled from that mess. So that's how I started my career. And it's almost as though like I've gone full 360. I'm still doing that, just with a deeper set of life experiences, work experiences, and honestly, a more mature skill set than I was 20 plus years ago.
To be in that role day to day, I imagine you have to be mission driven. You have to, how can I help others achieve that? Do you think that for someone to be successful or maybe sustain that kind of work, there has to be some inherent characteristic or trait that you were just born with? Or the nurture nature argument, going into social work at that level probably isn't just hey, this looks interesting, I'm going to get into it. It's got to be something that within you, you have to have that drive and desire or need to help others find a better solution in life. Otherwise, I imagine you get burned out really quickly.
Yeah, it's a good point. You definitely don't go into social work for the money. There's an inherent drive. I was raised by a social worker. My dad's a social worker. I was raised in a house where we were raised to give back. But I was also raised with the belief that we get to choose how we respond to life's challenges. And so there was a sense of empowerment in my house around, okay, if this is the challenge, what are you going to do to better the situation? And to have a mindset where I have control over some of those circumstances. Now, we don't always have control over every circumstance, but when we can find the way that we can control it does drive us forward. And to your point around being goal oriented, I think one of the things that I have distilled down around how I function in life and how I show up in my work, I have a human centered approach to everything I do, which emotional intelligence, relationships, belonging, and I combine that with a pretty active and bias towards action and results. So I do find myself in this interesting spot in that humanity is at the core of everything I do, and leading with empathy is at the core of everything I do. And I have this action-oriented mindset that drives me towards insights and deliverables and goals and I like to get stuff done. But not at the cost of bulldozing over people. It's sort of that balance of being human-centered with a results action mindset is how I've just navigated and shown up in the world. And it's really served me well in all the careers I've had.
As the child of a social worker, do you feel that your childhood and your children, do you think that they're at a distinct advantage of being raised by a social worker, somebody who has that level of empathy, but also the actual learned skills on how to manage difficult situations?
I am definitely not a perfect parent.
Nobody's perfect.
No one's perfect.
That's why I said advantage.
I don't know if my kids would answer that question the same way, but I like to think so. Maybe the proof will be when I see them as adults. I think I'm doing my best every single day to show up with that mindset and give them the support I can give them so that they can be better citizens of the world and make the world a better place, which is what is really important to me. But we'll see.
Totally. We'll check back in about 15 to 20 years, see where they're at. It's talking about skills throughout one's career. I wonder how many skills within one's individual career are actually transferable within their personal life. There are plenty that I can identify, the obvious ones like communication and organization, and skills like that are very applicable everywhere in life. And then there's other ones that are more technical skills, especially industry specific, that might be abstract or difficult to see how they could be relatable outside. But there are definitely, I would say, the majority of the skills in any kind of therapeutic profession, mind and body, the same. I can see those as being tremendously instrumental into applying within one's life.
Yeah, I like to hope so. I think flexibility and resiliency has been a big part of my career path, and as a result of some of the challenges along the way and the fear that comes with making career pivots and figuring out how to apply my skills, that resiliency and flexibility and agility has been really critical to my own growth and development. And again, I like to think that shows up in how I support my clients, how I support my kids when they get knocked down. But resiliency is so important. And I think about that a lot as a parent, when I want to swoop in and protect my child from any sort of hardship, which is a natural reaction as a parent. But I think about it is so important for them to experience challenges, because that's how we learn and grow, and that's how we build our resiliency. And I want to set them up for success as adults. And so it does help me mitigate my initial impulsive reaction to jump in and solve and fix, because I have that experience.
Years ago, my wife was reading a book. The book is titled Blessing of a Skin Knee.
Some right behind me. Wendy Mogul.
Exactly. Yep. The essence of it was essentially finding that balance and giving room for children to learn from both mistakes as well as a level of freedom, but not trying to raise them in a bubble where they can't be exposed to some of the hardships, even as small as they might seem. A paper cut, for instance, God forbid something actually catastrophic. But I do think that there is that balance in any part of one's life, especially as a parent, of finding ways to grow, develop, that gives people the chance to discover.
Yeah. And I think the concept of resiliency, my whole career has been working with people and people in challenging moments. And when you work with people, there's nothing predictable about that. And if the last 5 years have taught us anything, the world is unpredictable. And so it's not only our own individual resilience. I think of the sort of punching bag thing that is inflatable and you knock it down and it pops back up. That for me is the symbol of resiliency, and how quickly it pops back up is just how resilient we are. There's our own individual resiliency. And so that has shown up for me in really hard times, both in the settings I worked in and working with really a lot of crisis and a lot of hardship. And I've made my fair share of mistakes. And it also shows up organizationally. And I've seen that leading a nonprofit to be agile and being resilient as an organization is really critical. And then to move into corporate HR 6 months before a pandemic and the whole world turned upside down, being able to leverage that resiliency for myself, but then to be able to share that with my teams and the organization and how do we respond to these challenges is just something that has been a through thread in everything that I've done.
You went from clinical social work. What was that moment that you decided not just that you were going to switch careers out of that clinical social work practice, but into something fairly different? You were managing director for an overnight sleepaway camp, right?
Yeah. That's one of those moments where you just can't say no. It was the summer camp I grew up at, and I met my husband there. We were the total poster children for Jewish overnight camp. The assistant director was leaving and I was an active alum and they called. And I said, wait, I now have an opportunity to go and lead an organization whose mission, vision, their values were so in line with me and had given me so much of my identity. And truthfully, my life, as I met my husband there, the calling was strong. And I was living and working in Arizona at the time. And I remember, it's actually a side note, but my husband was overseas on a work trip. And I remember waking him up in the middle of the night. I was like, I'm sorry, buddy, we got to move back to Chicago. He was like, what? And I was like, there's like no debate on this one. Usually like you have some sort of like compromising conversation or negotiation. This was like, no, it was an opportunity for me to pivot from the direct clinical one-on-one work, which I found massively rewarding. I was starting to feel a little burnout, to your point when you mentioned that earlier. I was ready to flex into a leadership role and to do it in a way where I knew I'd be supported. I'd be part of a really positive, inclusive culture that would help me nurture and grow myself to the next level of my career. It seemed like a safe space to take that risk. And I started as the assistant director. I was owning our camper recruitment efforts. I owned all our staff hiring, our staff development, our staff training. I worked with parents. It was all camper care, mental health. So there were some real connective threads here in the sense that, yes, the industry that I was in was changing, but again, kids have needs, parents have needs, my board had needs, all the stakeholders had needs vested in this organization. And my job was to build relationships, create connections, ask questions, figure out what problems needed to be solved, and then build a team and go do it. And again, it felt like a natural, it didn't feel quite as drastic of a pivot. It just felt like entering a new phase of using my skills.
Probably felt a little bit like a homecoming.
Yeah.
You describe it as nostalgic background, this history that has shaped and made a massive impression into who you are today in your life. Obviously, meeting your husband there is a big part of that. There's probably a moment where you felt this was the dream job that you didn't look for, you weren't expecting, and it presented itself unexpectedly. How did you train or prepare yourself for that radically new from a mission? You're right. It's not that dissimilar from helping others as a clinical social worker in what you were doing prior. But from an operational standpoint, you're getting into a whole lot of new areas. So how did you adequately or prepare yourself to train for that first year?
Well, there was a lot I didn't know. And to be frank, seeing sort of a place you grew up at through the lens of a kid and as of a young teen and a 20-something-year-old to then all of a sudden be in the space of, oh, we have to make real business decisions. We have to talk budget. We have to look at numbers. We have to raise funds. We had to come up with our strategic plan. There was a lot we had to do. And I was like, what? It's no longer just like water skiing and arts and crafts. It's a business. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I was really fortunate to be surrounded by really smart people who had different skill sets than me. I don't pretend to know everything. I leaned in heavily to my skill of curiosity. I asked a lot of questions. I made mistakes, but I was given this lane to play in. And I was also empowered to use my strengths. They knew that one of my strengths was relationships and connecting people. I was meeting families. I was working with kids. I was figuring out what their concerns were. I was talking to parents who were sending their kids away for the first time and what that felt like. I was channeled in a way where I was really, my strengths, where my strengths played up. Where I didn't have the strengths, budgeting, creating spreadsheets, like things that are really technically sound, working with the board.
But it sounds like they approached you. They knew who you were before.
Yes. Yes.
It sounds like they wanted to help you
Yeah.
get up to speed and to fill in wherever you were still learning.
Yeah. And I was given the opportunity to shadow, to experiment. I was given a few budget line items to manage before I started to see the whole budget. I was asked to interview staff. That's great because I'm a naturally curious person and I knew what we were looking for. And then I was sent on the road to go overseas and hire and learn what that looked like as far as visas and time. So the technical piece, you're right, that was on the job learning with tremendous support by my supervisor and by our board and by the community, quite honestly. I think about that a lot, that there are always going to be technical skills that we need to develop or hone depending on where we are in our career. We can be taught certain things, but what I do know and what I felt really strong in was my ability, or is my ability, to build relationships and to ask big questions and to come up with, okay, what are those metrics for success? How will we know if we've achieved success? I had the mindset, and the things I didn't know, I asked and I was taught.
In the moment where a new leader is brought into that position, somebody's coming in to steer the ship. It could be for a few reasons. Somebody who's been beloved for many years is now ready to move on, and they just need someone to fill those big shoes. It could be also things aren't going well and we need someone to help course correct. Can you tell me what the mood was like? What were they hoping for a new person in that director role? And based on their goals, what were your strategies in those first literally getting to know you months?
So when I first joined, I joined as the assistant director. I had a director who was strategically and operationally excellent. He had come into the organization actually as, I don't want to say outsider, but not someone who had grown up within the organization. And there was real value in that. He was able to see the organization as a business. He had an MBA. He brought a different skill set. I knew that I was the complement to that. I was the internal talent. I was the one with the historical knowledge. I was the empath in the room, if not the MBA in the room. We balanced each other in a way that I think the community really responded to favorably. We were united in acknowledging what we brought to the table together. I don't know how many years I served as the assistant director, and then he moved on. And I think just given my presence in the community and the relationships I had built with all the stakeholders, there was a natural sort of transition to me to become director, because by that time, I had also gained the operational and technical skills that I needed to run the organization. And I think we were all very clear on what we brought to the table, and we weren't trying to be something we weren't. We were really good at looking at what is the talent in this room? Where are the gaps to our talent? And what do we need to do to bring that talent on board so that this can be the most highly effective team and get results? And I think there's a misnomer about nonprofits. We were a nonprofit that was massively profitable. We had a massively high retention rate of our campers and of our staff. We had really high engagement scores and satisfaction scores. We grew our surplus. I think, again, sometimes there's this sort of belief of, oh, summer camp, that's cute. It's a business.
It's a business with a lot of risk. Hundreds of people are entrusting you to watch their children, keep them safe, let alone have a good time, but to keep them safe, fed, nourished, and clean for weeks on end without their supervision.
And when you say safe, I want to just also double click on that as like physically, emotionally, socially, like there are so many layers to what safety looks like.
Yeah.
All the needs. And
all the needs.
I think doing that for 12 years, it's a lifestyle. I was uprooting myself every summer. I was saying goodbye to my family. There was a lot going on there that job demanded of me. I think crisis management as another skill set that really got honed in this job. And I when appropriate, I'll transition to how that crisis management really helped me show up in corporate HR effectively. But I will say that those 12 years, just from a professional standpoint, I started there in my late 20s without children. And that career really gave me the ability to lead hundreds of people, to understand what it takes to run an organization from not only just operationally, but what does leadership development look like? What does staff retention look like? how am I preparing these hundreds of young adults to go out into the world? Because I know that these kids aren't going to be summer camp counselors the rest of their life. And so a lot of my passion came through in that I had an opportunity to take hundreds of people every year and give them skills. To your point about what's transferable, the things that they were learning as summer camp counselors, my goal was to help them see how those could help propel them in whatever career path they chose post-college.
Yeah.
And I'm still in touch with a lot of those staff, and they work in all sorts of sectors and industries. And their summer camp experience, I think truthfully, is one of the most foundational experiences they've had that has helped them navigate a workplace. And while that helped me as well, I think one of the things I'm most proud of is being able to impact that next generation of talent that's gone off into our world.
That's an incredible way to look at it. And camp has the opportunity, whether it's even a day camp or overnight camp, it has the opportunity to give children at various ages flexible freedom to put themselves out there, to try new things, learn new games, learn new talents and skills, make friends that they may stay in touch with within their network for the rest of their lives. And it's a fond memory often to look back on and draw inspiration from at any point. You're building skills there, even unintentionally.
The skills of having to lead with empathy and to lead with humanity first in a way that is all about solving conflicts and building relationships and listening to each other. All of those skills, to be taught that in a way without social media and without devices, to be able to create an environment where we were teaching kids and young adults on truly people skills, right? How to make eye contact, how to navigate through difficult situations when we're living on top of each other, how to have different belief systems and have courageous conversations, how to get along when we're different, but we have more in common than we think. But I think camp was this little microcosm of being able to teach people the skills that are often really lacking in the greater world that we live in today. And I think we've seen a lot of that as a result of phones and what we're putting in our kids' hands today and their inability to navigate sort of these real important interpersonal skills. And so I do feel a tremendous amount of pride. And when I did shift into corporate HR after this experience with camping, especially in the company I went to, which had a much younger base of talent. It was heavily skewed younger talent because it was tech. All of a sudden I had the bird's eye view of, oh, okay, these are the skills that people are lacking. And so that was just an interesting switch for me to be able to see that.
What does color ward mean to you?
Oh gosh, I think it's about teamwork. I think it's about lifting each other up. It's about helping people do what they do best. It is about healthy competition. It's about getting things done, solving. I think there's nothing wrong with having a winner. Right. I think we all need to have a trophy. It's okay if there's one winner, but it's really about coming together and supporting each other for a common goal. And let's win the game. As a kid, it was like too much for me. As an adult, I loved it. I actually see my kids going off to summer camp now, and it's like one of the highlights of their summer. Yeah. Because there is this sense of we are in this together. We are a team. We are loyal to each other. There's a lot of just spirit and community. And I think it's just special to watch.
I think so too. It's rare to find that level of camaraderie at that age. It's no different than rallying around a professional sports team when they are in the most important game of the season or rooting for the underdog in any other situation. It provides the opportunity to do everything you just mentioned, to create this team that is working towards a common goal, a creativity, writing cheers together, creating signage, dressing in your uniform is the same. I could probably make the opposite case for it as well, of this fascist kind of weird movement, cult following. But the truth is, I think color war is a unique experience, and it's a bizarre concept that I think often becomes the highlight of that summer camp experience, or even school if that happens once in a while. I just want to touch on that. It came to mind because I think it's such a weird, it's a weird moment. Everything changes. As soon as like color war is broken out, like surprise, it's color war. Immediately everything shifts. Yeah. It's almost like you're literally going to battle. Okay, we're going to divide you all up. Here's the list. Go find your groups. Start wearing your colors. Start supporting each other. You don't know these kids. You're gonna in a moment. And it's healthy competition. I agree. There are a lot of trophies. Whether you believe that everyone deserves a trophy or not, participation trophy, I'm sure you can probably, as a social worker, pick apart like the detriments
Let's
of the
go back to the resilience conversation. Yeah.
It's true. I mean, I remember I never I'm still recovering from this. I never won trophies as a kid. Maybe as a result, like I never expect to now. However you want to define
positive
trophy.
reframe. Yeah.
It really is. I mean, I'm always like happy to participate. My children who love playing sports, none of my kids have ever really been on teams that have been very successful. Mm-hmm. But they individually are very successful in their role on the teams. And I think that's good enough. I'm not trying to persuade anyone to change their belief system. Everyone's entitled to their trophy. You probably took a lot from those years working at the camp as its director and applied them into your next role within corporate HR.
Yeah.
Tell me what that experience was like when you decided to get into that. And did you have some sort of like culture shock moving into a business of that size?
Yes, all of it. It was terrifying and it was exhilarating and like everything in between. I think one thing I just want to sort of name is that these transitions don't come without their own fair share of fear and imposter syndrome and anxiety and all the things. When I started to feel as though I was ready to make a change and leave camping, I got my own coach. Part of what I needed to be able to do was better understand, okay, what are my skill sets? What do I really love to do? And how can I take those and sell myself and brand myself in a way that makes me look marketable in an area that I don't have the business acumen and I didn't have the traditional career pathway that would put me in that spot.
Let me get this straight. You sought out a career coach to help you further explore and understand who you were, the skills that you had, and how you are going to start looking for that. So you did that on your own, and you did that before you knew what you wanted to get into.
Yeah.
My ignorant perspective and experience would be that somebody told you need a career coach and said, here, we're giving you one. And so what does it take for you to get to a mindset of saying, I'm going out of my way to decide that this is what I'm looking for?
I knew what I didn't want. I didn't want to stay in the camping world. I didn't want to stay in the nonprofit Jewish world. I knew that. I felt like I had still more to learn and give and grow. And I was curious about what else was possible out there. And I wanted to do it at a point in my life where that risk felt tenable. And actually, the mutual friend who introduced us also helped me see that. And she encouraged me to reach out to someone to say, maybe you just need someone to help figure that out and how to articulate that, and pointed me towards a coach. And a lot of that was about building up my own confidence. So I sought that coach out before I even left camp, because I also needed to get myself into a headspace where I felt like that risk and that leap of faith that I was about to take wasn't going to put anyone else and my kids, my livelihood at stake. I needed to figure that out. And I needed someone who, look, we all have our people in our lives who are our biggest cheerleaders. I didn't need cheerleaders. I needed someone to actually sit me down and help me figure out, what is it you love to do? What is it you do really well? And let's think about how we can position that into a completely different market. And so that person really helped me identify what I loved and what was important to me and what I do really well. And then I went out and I talked to everyone and their mother. I just started to talk to people who do interesting things and ask them a lot of questions about, what are your biggest challenges when it comes to people? What are your biggest challenges when it comes to leadership in your organization? And one thing that kept coming up in my conversations was generational talent, was this idea that we were moving into a world where our talent was becoming more and more diverse and younger, obviously. And the needs of each generation are looking a little bit different in the workplace. All of a sudden, I literally was having a conversation on a sideline of some sporting event with someone at this company. And they were talking a lot about how they were experiencing a tremendous amount of rapid growth. They were acquiring businesses right and left. And they were having a bit of a culture crisis, in that people were coming in wanting to hold on tight pre-existing cultures, didn't want to become part of corporate. We've got a lot of young talent who are demanding a lot of the workplace, and older C-suite members who are saying, you don't get to have that opinion. Your job's to show up and do your job. And again, what started to come up for me was, hey, man, where is the curiosity on both sides here? What is it that maybe the younger talent can offer that our older talent doesn't have? What can our older talent teach our younger talent? How can we start to look at this as an opportunity versus a threat? And that to me was an aha of, I think I could help. I think I could actually start to see how organizational culture and the employee experience I could impact in a corporate setting. And someone took a risk on me and took a leap and created a job for me in this company within their people team. I got to work. And I can maybe taste that your next question might be like, how did you train yourself for that role? I got real embedded in educating myself. I took a course. Again, my relationship building skills really showed up here. I met everyone in the company I could meet to learn about what they do so that when there was a problem that someone called me for, I had allies, I had colleagues who I could say, hey, I don't know anything about this. What should I know about compliance? What should I know about technical support? Right? I knew nothing. So there were things I had to learn, but at the core, what I brought to the table was my leading with empathy, was really figuring out what was going on.
That moment, that leap of faith, as you describe it, that the individual took on you, someone without the background, but willingness to learn and background experience that would be sympathetic to somebody good in this role, is actually 100% what this show is all about. It's about recognizing and identifying the skills that one has that would be very applicable into seemingly unrelated roles, as opposed to saying, we really need somebody with 5 to 10 years of experience in this very specific thing in order to be successful only in the way that we believe that they can be, or our perception is that somebody needs this background in order to do what we think needs to get done. But in reality, the way that you described as the assistant director to the director of the camp at the time is you're empath, as you described yourself, to their more financial operational experience and to balance.
Mm-hmm.
And the same goes for this role, is also taking your skills as a social worker, somebody who has managed organization of people and things that need to get done and goals and safety, and be able to learn the things that are fairly easy to learn. I do actually think that the way you describe this person taking a leap of faith, hiring you without that background in HR, it sounds like they're already a much more progressive leader in that they recognize that it's the person, it's not the background.
So let me just give you an example of what happened in my corporate HR that was completely unpredictable. And all of a sudden, I became a beacon of calm. I started at the company 6 months before the pandemic. In that time, I was on my listening tour. I was really doing exactly what you said, trying to figure out who are the players, what are the challenges. We were talking about organizational culture. We were talking about building connection and community across the organization, knowing we had a distributed workforce. What were our core values? What united us? Where could we allow smaller acquisitions to hold on to parts of their culture? Where do we need them to rally around the sort of the central office culture? I was on that listening tour. And then COVID hit. And that idea of what culture meant changed, right? We all went home. And it didn't matter what office you sat in. It was all of a sudden what really mattered is, what's my role here? What are we here to do? Why are we here to do it? And how are we going to get through this crisis with no playbook, right? There was no playbook on how to manage through this pandemic. What I found interesting that was going on around me was a sense of panic, that employees were panicking, leadership was panicking. There were questions on how do we know people will be productive at home? Schools are closed. You've got kids clamoring all over folks. You've got the world is upside down. We don't know. We have multi-generational people, households living together. Are people getting sick? Do people have what they need? All of a sudden, the need to lead with humanity just reared its ugly head in the corporate world. And in my mind, I was like, yes, here we go. This is everything I love. Was like, let me in on this one, because we were talking about people and we were talking about challenging moments. And that's my bread and butter. And all of a sudden it was, what do we do? Everyone has to go work from home. Now, this was a company booming in a pandemic. So this wasn't about layoffs or furloughs. We were doing very well. But people were like, I don't know. I can't see people at their desks. How do I know that they're working? How am I going to hold on tight to the control as a leader?
That's, by the way, a really important word, the control.
Yes, control. It was fear and control. And I got it. And I understood that everyone was coming at this pandemic from their own perspective, and to be able to hit time out and say, okay, folks, talk about crisis. I used to work with people where there was real crisis, life or death crises.
Actual crisis.
Actual crises. And that's where all of a sudden, like, my social work bell went off, which was I actually supported families who were being torn apart by the foster care system. Then it was camp, and I was literally sleeping with the weather radio to see whether or not I had to put 500 people in a shelter because there was a tornado coming. Real crisis. Not that this wasn't a crisis of a global proportion, this pandemic, but my ability to stay calm allowed me to become a real trusted advisor on the leadership team at this company, which was, what the heck do we do right now? And it was like, okay, are people okay? Do people have what they need? And what questions do we need to be asking our employees? What do they need? How can we show up better for them right now?
Right.
People were like, what do you mean? I'm like, let's just ask what they need. Let's stop making assumptions of what they need. And so my skills just started to show up in a way where everyone was like, we don't know what to do, call back.
Making an assumption here, and it's rooted in realistic fear, and it's real, and it's not, there's nothing wrong with it, but it is truth that the people who have that big fear immediately, their fear is, will this cripple our business? That's a real fear. And
totally
the questions that you identified that should be asked, that most leaders, I don't want to say aren't sensitive enough, but maybe it's not the first thing they think of. And I understand why. Because if I want to make a case and defend any leader who's worried about their business, I could also say, you know, what's awful about your business going under? It's that all these people that you provide a paycheck to that support their family by way of employment through this successful business are now at real risk too. So I can also make a case for that. The first reaction is, what's this going to do to my business? But the real questions are, what can we do to empower people to be able to do their jobs well, efficiently, and stop micromanaging, stop making like holding,
get their needs met. Yeah. This was a phrase that kind of kept going on and on in my head, which was, how can we meet the personal needs of our employees while meeting the business demands? And that is a never ending tightrope.
Yeah.
We lived in a very employer-centric world pre-pandemic. The pendulum swung very strongly to the employee-centric during the pandemic, right? So many companies' engagement scores peaked in 2020 because every company leaned heavily into their employees. Okay, we're here for you, we're showing up for you, all these extra benefits, work from home, right? So engagement scores went up. Great. What we started to see is when we started to bring people back, right? We were having these sort of crucial conversations around what does coming back look? Is it hybrid? Is it fully remote? Is it full flexibility? Is it 5 days in the office? And again, we started to lose that sense of, well, how can we support the needs of the business with the needs of the employee? Everyone had a point of view. I had established really strong, trusting relationships within the business where I had a seat at that table to be able to help facilitate those dialogues and those conversations.
There are many reasons to make a policy and a decision, and every organization, company is going to have different needs. I recognize that. Okay. Now that I put that disclaimer aside, you said something that's very important to remember is that everyone has different needs. So therefore, the question that has no easy answer is, shouldn't therefore the policy be up to the individual and how their needs are best met? It's as opposed to saying, now that everything's safe, everybody needs to come back in full time, or like you suggested, a hybrid. You pick 2 days a week. I think the real question that always has to be asked is why? And sometimes you have a legitimate answer and say, this is the reason we need you in for X number of hours or days a week. And that's fine. That's justified because you made the right decisions based on the needs of the company. And hopefully it aligns well with the people doing those jobs. And if not, they will find other jobs. But I think a lot of times companies are guilty of making a policy that
in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think one thing that was fascinating, because I know you've asked, how do I train for some of these pivots? And what I will say is that I got really, I don't want to say lucky. It happened to be circumstance that I ended up in a job where the world turned upside down and there was no playbook. There was no way for me to train.
You couldn't fail at that job because it had never been done before.
I could have failed, but what I did do is because I couldn't learn technically what to do while leading through a pandemic and massive social and political unrest, what I could do was leverage the skills I did have. And that's what served me very well in that role. And that's when we experienced George Floyd being murdered, and we experienced a rise in anti-Asian hate, and we experienced the turning back Roe v. Wade. And there was a lot of stuff happening in the workplace people look to me to say, what do we say? What do we do? How do I show up as a leader in this space? How do I acknowledge my own identity as a white male in a time where that's scary to me.
Right.
And I don't want to get fired for saying the wrong thing. And there was a lot of vulnerability and there was a lot of fear. And my skill set was, let's talk about that. And let's have that difficult conversation and figure out what our options are and how we can move forward together as a team and as an organization. And I am so immensely grateful for the experience that I had in that corporate HR job during the years I had it, because there was such crisis. There was so much change. And at the end of the day, what it was a massive disruptor to how we work, not where we work, but how we work. And I was there for all of it. Like, I was excited about it. It energized me. It allowed me to use my strengths, and it allowed me to cultivate, again, what I really ultimately love to do. Every career path I've chosen or job I've chosen, I feel like I've been on the same career path, but it's more just where I apply those skills that's shifted for me. It's really been about, where can I make an impact? Where can I solve creative big problems? And where can I work with really great people who just want to be better? And so that ultimately led to my final, hopefully, shift, which was, how do I take all of these last 20 plus years and start to really build the practice that I really want to build for myself? I saw a natural transition point within that job and in that company where I was ready again to take a different path, and really distilled down. What I was really proud of was, I've worked with leaders in a clinical setting. Now as an executive coach, I've come full circle to what I started with, which was helping people navigate through really hard challenges as a social worker, to now being in a place with a much deeper life and world experience and a more mature skill set to still help people navigate through hard decisions. But because I've had that experience in clinical settings, I can help people navigate through burnout and stress and anxiety, imposter syndrome. Because I led a nonprofit, I am currently coaching nonprofit leaders, and I can understand the unique challenges that nonprofit leaders face. And then I am coaching senior executives in publicly traded companies. And I've sat in that space and gone through mergers and acquisitions and layoffs and restructuring and leadership development programs. And I'm not saying that you have to have all that to be successful as a coach, but I think it gives me more credibility. I think it gives me a deeper understanding for what my clients are going through. And ultimately, it's put me in a position where I've had to navigate and learn so much, so that my mindset is one of, how can we see these challenges as opportunities versus threats? And I'm able to apply that mindset and teach my clients on how to do that within their own challenges that they're facing. And so I do feel that sort of the whole career path for me, and really taking my skill set, has landed me today exactly where I meant to be. But I wouldn't be successful where I am today if it weren't for all of those different experiences that I've had.
Coming back to credibility about what you do, it's not saying that you have to have the background that you have in order to be able to do what you do well. But the credibility is there because you have gone through all these vastly different experiences. It's all about your reputation. What does your background do to back up and bolster the reputation that you have to gain confidence for your prospective clients? And I think that is actually very important to acknowledge.
Yeah. And listen, this talk about skills that I have, there's skills I don't have and I've never really flexed before. And that's like business development, right? Like, I've always worked for someone and received my paycheck. And I took a big leap of faith in going off on my own, knowing full well that it was going to stretch me in a way with a skill set that I really never had to flex before. So getting really clear on who I can support, what clients I'm going after, and also just having some of that credibility to help generate that business has been massively powerful. There's a lot of things I'm good at. I like to leverage those and stay in my lane, so to speak. You don't want me as a math teacher. I can't even help my 7th grade kids with math. You don't want me. I can't play in the WNBA. I'm literally 5 feet tall. No one can see that, but I am. And so I know what I don't do well, and I know where I can fill those gaps. So business development for me is one of those things where I had imposter syndrome and fear of going off on my own. And can I do this? Who's going to hire me? What I got real clear on is, what are those experiences I've had, personal and professional, that are putting me in a position now to be able to say, yes, I understand the challenges that women leaders face in the workplace. I understand the challenges that leaders face when having difficult and courageous conversations around race and identity in the workplace. I know what it feels like to run a nonprofit and have board relationship issues that are challenging or budget issues and have to fundraise. Yes, I can still coach folks if I haven't really sat exactly in your shoes. But I will say that I've reframed that mindset around I can do this because of those experiences. Not that, oh, I haven't done the same thing for 25 years. These pivots, these transitions, whatever we call them, have ultimately been another way for me to flex my skill set, get real clear on what I do and do it really well, get real clear on what I don't do well and find ways to learn those things. And I do feel like that Venn diagram, I've landed in the middle and exactly where I'm meant to be now.
Well said. How much of your limited even experience on the client side of the professional coaching experience that you had when you were transitioning from being the director of the camp into HR, eventually finding that based on that person providing a little maybe analysis of who you are, your skills, your interests, your strengths, how much of that experience for you has been influential or guided you in your now experience as an executive coach?
Oh, I still have a coach. I think this is like the conversation of like all therapists.
I was just going to say the same thing.
It's no different. I would be a fraud if I went out there and preached coaching and how effective it can be in helping us navigate through our professional challenges if I didn't have my own. I use my coach all the time in different ways for whatever is going on in my business, whether they're difficult clients that I'm working with and I'm at an impasse, or it's how can I generate more clients? And I have my coach. I use my coach all the time because ultimately we all benefit from having that thought partner who can help us discover those insights that, like I said at the beginning, we all have the answers. Sometimes we just need someone to help us figure out where they are buried in our brain and help us create some action plans to say, okay, what are your options? What are you going to go do? Now go do them. And having that accountability partner, having that thought partner where I can really wrestle with my challenges in a safe space and then go out and activate the plan is transformational for me on so many levels and is what I aspire to give back to my clients.
Safe space and productive space for that matter.
100%. This is not about sitting on the couch thinking about like how my parents messed me up and like therapy. This is about here's where I am in the fork in the road. What are my options in front of me? What path do I want to take? And what do I need to activate that plan? And what are the metrics for success? How will I know I did it? How will I know that I reached my success?
Yeah, it's really important to have a partner for accountability, somebody that's going to hold you accountable to what you say you're going to do or to the level of quality results that you hope need to be there.
Yeah.
As well as somebody to help point out, identify your blind spots, the areas that you can't see yourself. You're blind to them. You don't realize the pitfalls, the obstacles that you're putting in your own way, or the things that you can't realize are problems for you.
Yeah.
And so to have somebody that you can rely on, trust in a safe space and productive manner to be able to deliver the results that you otherwise probably would either can't do without them or would just take you a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fully on board with that. I feel the same way. You talked about it as the metaphor or similar concept of a therapist likely should always be in therapy themselves too. There's probably a number of reasons for that. But that also, even as a client or patient, you don't just go to therapy when you're in crisis.
Right.
Because that is reactive. You also want to be proactive. You want to maintain, you want to create baseline. And part of a therapist's opportunity is to know you well enough and where that baseline is. So when you start deviating or spiking, and maybe you don't even realize that your speech pattern has changed, your body language has changed, or you seem to be trending towards crisis or problems, that they can recognize the signs and symptoms that maybe you can't yourself. And so management, maintaining is so important too, not just in the moment when you need it most.
Yeah, I read one thing that I'll just share that has stayed with me always is that leadership is about doing hard things with humanity. And I think we have a lot of people in the world today who are in leadership roles, whether it's by choice or they got promoted based on their technical competencies, but don't necessarily enjoy or have the people leadership skills to do the work. And it's hard. And I think coaching is an opportunity for folks to explore what are those blind spots in their leadership capabilities, how they can wrestle with some of those challenges in a way that is safe, that is productive. And I like to say I support always while challenging often. And that we need that in our lives. We need places where we can come in and say, listen, I know I manage a team of 200 people. It's hard work. I don't know what I'm doing all the time. And here's the problem in front of me. And I need to figure out my best path forward and I'm stuck. There's no shame in that. and companies that invest in coaching for their top performers and for their leaders that they see who have potential. I applaud them. Individuals who come out proactively and say, I just got elevated into a new role and I want to up my leadership game and proactively seek out coaching. I applaud them. But again, similar to sort of destigmatizing mental health, that ability for us to start to destigmatize that leadership is hard. It requires skills that we're not always training people to have. We assume that once someone's put in a people leadership role, they know what to do. We need to give them the resources and the toolkits to do that work so that when there are crises, when there are challenges in front of them, they can go back to their toolkit and say, I know what I need to do here, or at least I know who to call.
Yeah. A real problem with our society is that the typical way that one progresses in their career journey, the arc, is that you're really good at a job. You keep getting better at it. And so the natural tendency is to promote that person into a different role eventually, either immediately or eventually they get to a role where they actually can't continue performing what they were so good at and doing that work. And now they're put into a really completely different role. Like, hey, you were such a great swimmer in the Olympics. You should probably now start coaching people. And so maybe you don't have those skills. And it happens all the time. And sometimes people just want to continue doing that work that they loved and that they were really good at and they felt successful in. But how do we continue allowing that to happen when sometimes their level of experience and quality might price them out of that position? Oh, you've been doing this so long and I can't there's a certain point where I can't pay somebody this much for that role. And
to be an individual contributor.
Yeah.
We need you to step beyond that role. We've decided that to go up the pyramid or to go up the triangle of the organizational hierarchy requires you to take on people leadership responsibilities. Not everyone's cut out for it. Not everyone wants it.
Right.
And it's really hard. And are we doing enough to support and train the folks that are in those roles? And that's what I have loved to see happen throughout all of my experiences. And ultimately, I want people to be successful in navigating through those challenges in a way that is honest and pure and direct and allows them to get things done.
If I can put you on the spot, at this very end of our conversation. So,
yes.
If there was a piece of advice that you could give anybody out there, whether they're looking to transition into a new career, to pivot and to move in, or they're happy in their career, but some piece of advice that would give them another tool in their toolbox, allowing them to take stock inventory or prepare for the next stage in their career, what might that be from your perspective?
So I hope this answers your question, because this is the one thing that has propelled me in every career pivot that I've done. Changing our mindset. We all have an inner critic. We all have limiting beliefs. There's a lot of fear when it comes to transition and change. And oftentimes we ask ourselves, what if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if I can't make this change? My biggest piece of advice would be to change the question. What if it does work? That has been a journey for me. Every career shift I've made is as soon as you start to change the question to what if it does work, your energy changes, your mindset changes, and it propels you into action out of curiosity and what's possible versus what if it doesn't work and we're propelled through fear and shame and disappointment and stress and anxiety, right? Those emotions don't really serve us well. And so when we change the question, we start to ask it as, instead of what if it doesn't work, start to say, what if it does work? And I think that has been a question that has fueled me every step along the way when I've wondered what could possibly happen next, how I can transition my skills. And so I just encourage people to change the question you're asking.
Fantastic advice. It's people often recognize or identify what is the cost of action. And a lot of times we do not emphasize what is the cost of inaction.
Yeah.
What if I don't take this risk? What if I don't try this out?
Exactly. Yeah. So we just have to start asking different questions and get a coach. They're really helpful.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. And we'll leave the link to your corporate site and your LinkedIn in the show notes. Becky Altman, I just want to say thank you for being here today and sharing your fabulous story, wealth of advice for our audience and for myself included. So thank you for being here today.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I want to thank Naomi Sugar for recommending Becky as today's guest, and to you, our listeners, for joining us on this episode of Transferable Skills. Remember, if you found value in today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with your friends and network. Your support helps us reach more people who could benefit from these stories. Transferable Transferable Skills is produced by Cackle Media and music by Cost Monkey. For more resources and inspiration on leveraging your skills for a successful career transition, visit our website at cacklemedia.com. Follow us on social platforms at Cackle Media for updates and join our community of listeners who are all about embracing change and growth. If you have any questions, feedback, or want to share your own career pivot story, email us at skills@cacklemedia.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening. And remember, the skills you've gained can take you anywhere. Until next time, keep exploring those transferable skills.